think we're just going to start because I'm anticipating there might be quite a large number of questions for Professor Leitch. So we'll get going. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Claire Hasty. I'm in the Public Health Research Group here. We're really glad to have Professor Leitch here today to speak to us for the first Morris Bloch lecture of this academic year. This is a hybrid talk, so I am going to look on my laptop and check that everything's working fine. So welcome to everyone at home or in your office as well. I've got a bio here that I'm going to read out properly just so that I don't mess it up because there's quite a lot here. So Professor Jason Leitch is our National Clinical Director in the Health and Social Care Directorate. He has been since 2015. He's an honorary professor at the University of Dundee. From 2005 to 2006, he was a Quality Improvement Fellow at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement in Boston, sponsored by the Health Foundation. He's also a trustee of the UK wing of the Indian Rural Evangelical Fellowship, which runs orphanages in Southeast India. He qualified as a dentist in 1991 and was a consultant oral surgeon in Glasgow. He has a doctorate from here, University of Glasgow, a master's in public health from Harvard, and is a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons of England, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, and the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. He's also a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. So I met Professor Leitch last year at the Lancet UK Public Health Science Conference, which was held in Glasgow, where he was a keynote speaker, and he very kindly agreed to come here to speak to us today. His talk went down incredibly well at the conference, and he actually had by far the best feedback in the evaluation by some way.
It's a high bar.
It was a wonderful talk, so I really hope everybody enjoys it. You've been very generous with your time today. He's also contributed to some videos for online teaching for our master's students. So we're so grateful for you to be here. And you should already be very familiar to everybody after the last few years of the pandemic, where we heard a lot from you and saw quite a lot on you. And today he's going to talk to us about leadership and a bit about how you communicated so effectively during that period. It's about 45 minutes, roughly, that you have to speak for, and then we'll have questions. If everybody online could keep questions till the end, then I'll have a look in the chat. That would be really helpful. Professor Leitch.
Thank you. This is nice, isn't it? Did you like your old Lilybank Gardens? Nobody knew you were at work or not? Better than this big open thing where people can see you. This is a lovely, it's the first time I've been in because it's not officially open yet. So we're coming to officially open it quite soon, but it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. It genuinely is a privilege. And it's a nice break from 1,000 questions from the UK Public Inquiry. So I actually have 1,000 questions to answer with a 6-week deadline. So you are a treat, but you can't be harder than that, I don't think. You're also freaking me out slightly because I've just met Angela Harkins, who was in my class at university, and I haven't seen each other for about 20 years. And Aileen Bell has just walked in, who's the dean of your dental school, and she and I are old pals. So I'm going to have to. She unfortunately will know if the stories are true or not. So I'm going to have to adapt some of my talk to make the stories more truthful. They won't all be true, but some of them might have to be. So thank you for having me. I can't believe this many people have given up a lunch period to come and hear me, but let's try and make it as light and interactive as we can. There are some serious moments, of course, because you've asked me to talk about the lens of COVID and then maybe some lessons from that lens. Are you a wee bit fed up with COVID? I am. So I'll try and make it a bit more generic for you, although we're not post-COVID. We are in whatever phase this happens to be, and we can talk about that at the end if you wish. But let's perhaps lead into that from here. So this is where we are. This is where I also graduated.
Did anyone
is that in the room? Children, I'm used to during COVID. Lots of children don't, more unusual. It reminds me of us. So during COVID, my directorate, because I was on the telly, my directorate was run by a senior civil servant. So she and I ran it together, and she was invisible. You'd never know she was there, but she was completely wonderful. But she has 2 toddlers. And we were on a meeting on, I think, maybe Cobra, certainly SCORE, which is our version of Cobra. So very, very high up, okay? And we're deciding something really important. And of course, texting flippantly during it, like everybody does in all meetings. And she said, this is what I'm actually looking at. And her 18-month-old we were all on Teams and Zoom like that. So our 18-month-old was standing on his high chair and he'd poured his baked beans over his whole body. So she was talking to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the First Minister of Scotland, and her 18-month-old had baked beans all over. I've got that picture somewhere. I should bring it back in. Now I didn't know you'd be here. So where are you? So that's 1991. Where are you, Angela? You must be there. There you are. There you are. You're gonna get a new circle. What point to you? So that's 1991, 32 years ago, on the steps of the chapel, just up the hill. So I hope that does that give me some credence in the room, maybe? Just a little tiny bit. And then we jump 30 years to here. So how does that happen? I've honestly got very little idea of how that happened. This is me looking at her to say, shut up, it's my turn. And then she would then look at me for the next 5 minutes and say, shut up, it's my turn. So she's an introvert, I'm an extrovert, but we both like to talk. And it was often a bit of a competition to see who could say the most. She was the most briefed, the most understanding of all the politicians I met during this whole period, whether you like her politics or not. She was up before me, she went to bed after me, I once went in and she said, have you read the Spy B minutes? I said, not only have I not read them, First Minister, I don't know what it is. And we of course had to learn what Spy B was. Spy B was the behavioural science advisory group that was underneath SAGE that gave us all the behavioural science advice. So it was crucial, but she knew stuff before us. I'm not sure she ever really needed us, to be honest. This is in the early days of the COVID response, when you were at home, and certainly your mums were probably watching this live on the telly. Most of you weren't. I realise that because you're under 70. And we signed them all. The other thing I learned, any signers in the room? Anybody can do British Sign Language? The other thing, we had to work with signers a lot. What signers hate are numbers, right? They hate numbers because they're really hard to do quick. So just for fun, I used to do big long numbers really quickly. And I would go in every day once I got to know them, because I was with them every day. You got to know them a wee bit and I'd say a lot of numbers today. Faces would fall and you would just throw in 1,300,046 just to piss them off. Because if you watch them, they're trying to go. So that I don't know if you think this is true, but in the environment you're in, quite a lot of the work is routine. A lot of my work is routine. I was in charge of cancer policy and quality and safety, and it felt like a long haul. It felt like a medium-term vision. It felt like we were doing things for medium-term at best and population health long-term at best, although there's an argument to do more short-term, isn't there? But this was different. And as I genuinely do try and answer 1,000 questions from the public inquiry, I'm looking back in my diary and the pace of events was absolutely astonishing. From the Wuhan early pneumonias through to lockdown on the 23rd of March, to Catherine's resignation a week later, to media interviews. I did 12 media interviews in the week of like the 6th of March or something. So I've just begun to try and retrace the sequence of events in because this is my personal statement, and the pace at which we were working and the hours we were working was just astonishing. And worse for those who are in our intensive care units, our GP practices, our EDs, our care homes, people sleeping in sleeping bags inside those care homes to save the lives of the residents, etc., etc. This is the scale of what we faced, what you, your families, I faced, and it's important in a room when we talk about COVID as the frame through which we might learn. And it's important to recognise that some people in this room almost certainly lost loved ones. Some of you have long COVID. Some of you have the effects of the disease economically on your lives, almost certainly. There will be people who lost parents or loved ones or others in this room. This is now a gross underestimate of those who have died. The most recent research data puts it at above 20 million. So we think 20 million died of this virus as a direct result of the infection of the virus, never mind those who died with this accelerating their existing disease, of course. And then you've got all the other things we'll come to in a moment or two when we think about trying to understand the crisis in a deeper way. So here are my three lessons that I think apply to population health generally, that apply to health and care generally. So we're going to do them in sequence. They get quicker, so don't be too worried if we spend too long at the beginning, okay? This one is fast, I promise. You don't have to worry about your lunch or your next appointment. So understand your problem, choose to lead, and take time to breathe. They're my three principal lists. So let's do them in sequence. So first of all, truly understand your problem. Now, I don't need to tell a room of learners and teachers in an academic institution that maybe the simple thing that you see in the Daily Mail isn't the whole story. Well, who knew? Because this was much more complex than it seemed. And I mean the response as well as the science. So let's say that this was our mission, to reduce deaths from coronavirus, to reduce non-virus harms for the population, and to keep health and care staff safe and supported. Now, if it was just the beginning of this, so if the public inquiry says to me, how would you reduce deaths from coronavirus? Well, that's very straightforward. That's how you deal with infectious disease. We've known that for 100 years. Semmelweis taught us that. Lister taught us that. You put everybody in their houses and you wait for it to pass. That's what you do. But then you all lose your jobs, you all lose your income, the economy dies, you have to shut Heathrow Airport, you get no bananas, no mangoes, no pineapples, no. So you want to be New Zealand, you can be New Zealand, but if you want to be New Zealand, there are massive implications for an economy like ours. If you want to be New Zealand is basically at the other end of the world. It doesn't have a financial headquarters, etc., etc. You can choose to be New Zealand, but you better be careful because the non-virus harms for your population will be absolutely immeasurable. So the public inquiry is going to look, you can tell it's on my mind, can't you? I'm going to look and ask us, the decision makers principally, not the advisors, about how we did that. So here's what we did. This is the grass market in February 2023. This is the grass market in March the 24th, 2023. Nobody's ever done that in history. Never. We didn't do this in the Spanish flu. There's never been a global lockdown on this scale in living memory. It never happened. And pretty much every country in the world did it. Don't believe what they say about Sweden. It's not true. They did it too. They just did it by asking nicely. That's the difference. And guess what the Swedes do if you ask them nicely? They do it. What do you think Glaswegians would do if you asked them nicely? Go out to the pub is what they do. Shut the fucking pubs. That's not the Glaswegians going. It's very simple. That's the difference between the Swedish initiative and the Scottish initiative. It's you, not us. So when you try and understand this problem, though, it gets complicated really quickly. So imagine the room. It's early March, and you have the leader of your country. It could be Emmanuel Macron, it could be Boris Johnson, it could be Nicola Sturgeon. And they're asking you for public health advice about what to do. There's a novel coronavirus. You know very little about it. You don't know who it kills. You don't know if antivirals are going to work. You have been told by your scientists that a vaccine isn't coming. In fact, you've been told a vaccine isn't possible. Impossible. 18 months later, we had a vaccine. I mean, it's a scientific miracle. But at the time, you don't know it's coming. In fact, you think it isn't coming. And you don't know if the antivirals work because they're usually rubbish. And so your leaders of your country are looking at you to say what you're going to do. So the CMO, Catherine initially, then Gregor, and I, and the CNO are responsible for harms 1 and 2. Harms 1 and 2 are relatively straightforward. So the direct harm from COVID, the misery, death and destruction from the virus itself, and what your response is going to do to the rest of the health and care system. So we stopped cancer screening for 3 months, stopped it, because we needed the staff. That was an enormous decision to say we're not going to do any cancer screening for 3 months. So we knew that would harm people. The alternative was not to prepare and not to have the tripled intensive care unit we would need for this harm. You see the transitions and the seesaw effect we're having to do here, the balance. So now it gets more complicated because also in the room is Linda Ball. Do you remember her? Linda, the best COVID communicator in Scotland, I would argue. You don't have to argue back. Is Scotland's chief social policy advisor. Now, before her, it was a woman called Carol Tannehill, who people in this room will know. Carol Tannehill, who ran the Glasgow Centre for Population Health. So Carol, then Linda. So the First Minister then looks across it. So Gregor and I do this bit. They then look at Linda and Carol and say, so what, if we do what they do, they say, what will happen? And Carol says, well, no, do what they say, that's fine. But here's what it will do to the loneliness for old people. Here's what it will do to the education of the 14-year-olds who won't be able to sit their exams. Here's what, oh, damn. It's just got a little bit more complicated. And then there's another guy in the corner who none of you know, called Gary Gillespie. Gary Gillespie is Scotland's chief economist, and he's a genius. And he says, First Minister, do what they say, batter on. That sounds like a very wise thing to do. But just let me show you what that's going to do to your gross domestic product, your tax returns, the number of businesses that are going to go bust, the number of people who are going to kill themselves because they lose their businesses, and the number of restaurants that are going to shut. Now it got an awful lot more complicated. You want to be in her seat? I don't want to be in her seat. It was terrible. And this is what we call the 4 harms framework, which doesn't do it justice for the emotion and the challenge that is contained within it, but it allowed us a framework through which we could see the problem. And then we could try collectively with Gary and Carol and others to try and come up with the best advice we could to the decision makers for them to make the choices they then had to make. So here's harm 1. Harm 1 is pretty straightforward. That's 18 million dead. 18 million dead from the direct consequence of a novel coronavirus that we now know attacks people with weakened immune systems, not people with respiratory and cardiac disease, which is what we thought in March 2020. We now know it's a disease of immunity, not a disease of lungs, although it's often the lungs that get you. But it's the people who are vulnerable are chemotherapy, HIV, the elderly because of their immune system, those who have other immune challenges in their lives. It's not COPD. Initially, COPD was in the at-risk group. Turns out COPD doesn't put you at any more risk of this. That science is changing all the time. We're still not catching up. It's only 3 years old, this virus. Flu is 100 years old. But flu researchers for a century. But COVID researchers for 3 years. Is it any wonder we don't fully understand what it is? So 18 million seems abstract, doesn't it? It doesn't feel real. So let me make it real for you. This is a care home in Shetland, which I have subsequently visited. This is where the first 7 people died in a care home in Scotland. A skier went to northern Italy, stayed in a chalet, came home, and basically middle-class skiers spread this virus around Europe. That's how it happened. It would have happened in some other inevitable way. It just happened that northern Italy got its. Remember northern Italy with people dying in intensive care out in the corridors, Clive Murray walking through the hospital. Remember all that? Well, that's what eventually brought it to Shetland randomly. This care home is 40 miles from Lerwick. It's now Lerwick's in the middle of nowhere. Imagine how much this is in the middle of nowhere, and they had no idea. COVID didn't have a name. The disease didn't have a code. The WHO hadn't made it. 7 dead. 7 dead in 2 weeks. I went to visit and I met the families. I met the staff, and the staff were crying. I was crying, and the domestic, who was Polish, wouldn't speak. She was intimidated by the big crowd, and I forced her to speak and tell me her story. And she said the bus wouldn't stop to pick her up. She lives 10 miles from here, and the bus wouldn't stop to pick her up. And the shop wouldn't serve anybody who worked in the care home. That's not 80 million dead. That's the reality of people's lives who are actually living and breathing this disease in early 2020. After the 7 deaths, Once we knew what we were doing and how to manage it, they didn't lose another single resident, not one. They had other disease, but they didn't lose another single resident. There aren't bad people in here. Once you have the guidance, once the health and care workers know what to do, once you understand the science of the disease enough, you can protect the vulnerable. It's not foolproof, of course not. We were partly jammy, but once you do it, you can. And I went, and the place was positive and good. The infrastructure was poor, but the people were trying their best. That's harm number one. Harm from the actual virus. Harm number two, I'm afraid, is what the virus then does by you responding and taking everybody out of orthopedic surgery to help in intensive care, stopping cancer screening, stopping the appointments, all of that. And this is what you end up with in terms of normal appointments. So this is weekly emergency and planned admissions for Scotland. Top is emergency admissions, unscheduled care. The bottom is planned care. So the planned care is what we did. We stopped it. We said, stop all planned care. Instantly, we can turn that tap off. We can completely control that. We can say no more elective surgery, right? So that's understandable. The top one is emergency admissions. We didn't tell anybody to stop breaking their hip. But emergency admissions fell off a cliff because everybody stayed in the house. Fantastic. What we should do all the time. No car crashes, no kids falling off their scooters. But also fewer strokes and heart attacks. Really? That seems a bit odd. Where are the strokes and the heart attacks? They've got better? Healed? Of course they didn't. They're just dead. We told them to stay away and they stayed away. They're dead. So this is harm number two. It just got a bit more complicated for you, didn't it? It's not harm one anymore. Harm three, this is school absence. I mean, harm three, you can have 40,000 graphs. There's people in this room who could show social policy graphs better than me. But dark blue is normal school absence, other reasons. Light blue is COVID school absence. So you can see you add about a third to school absence. And this is not the period where we shut, where everybody was off except key workers. And if you think the solution to Postle's education is to give all the kids a laptop, you've never been to Postle. So that's not the solution to educating children anywhere in the world, never mind in some of our deep inequality codes in Scotland. My wife's a teacher in the middle of Lanarkshire, and if you think teaching from our dining room table, kids who can't speak English, she's an English as an additional language teacher in Motherwell and Shotts. You can't do that from the dining room table in Glasgow. It's impossible. So that school absence is real missed education. And some of you will have kids who have suffered from that. Some of you will have adapted, and your kids will have flourished or at least stayed stable. Others will still be suffering from that miss. So that's social harm. So what do? Keep them open and make harm number one worse? Or would it make harm number one worse? Did you know? No, you didn't know. Could you? No. Sweden kept all their schools open the whole time. Only country in Europe didn't shut their schools. Their mortality, their harm, it's difficult to count. Their overall harm, we're all roughly in the same pack across Western Europe, roughly. I mean, there's differences, but we're roughly in the same place. But they kept their schools open. So does that tell us that if you got exactly this virus again, maybe kids weren't the big problem that you thought they were going to be? They weren't the source of infection rates that you expected them to be. And then harm number four, this is GDP, gross domestic product. So this is lockdown number one. Basically, you shut the economy down. Now, remember, we had no idea how long that would last. None. So we thought, 3 weeks will be fine. This will go away. It didn't burn itself out. It kept coming. And we locked down again at Christmas, if you recall. I'm really sorry. I know it was Christmas Eve. I absolutely know it was Christmas Eve. I had announced it in September, if you remember, live on the radio, and I was the Grinch on the front page of every tabloid in the country. I kind of knew it was happening, but they just didn't like me telling them in September. So this is huge. So this is why the guy who owns Eusebi took a while to speak to me again. Now I think I've put back most of the money I took off him. but this is why, if you were a soft play owner or a nursery owner, this is hard. If you were an employee, then the UK government stepped in and you probably did okay. But if you were an Uber driver or a delivery driver, somebody in the gig economy, you didn't do so well. And if you were a private enterprise business owner, then this was a really challenging period for you. Overall, though, what does that mean for the population? Well, here's an extreme version of the same thing in case I haven't hit you over the head with it enough. This is what we call crisis grants. These are, you apply to your local authority for money to put food on the table and clothe your kids. It's a very, very high bar. All local authorities have a mechanism for it, but you have to be in proper trouble. You would usually have been into Social Security, Citizen Advice, and they would have helped you with your crisis grant application. It doubled in 2020, and it has never recovered. So this is raw economic harm and inequality created by the virus and the response to the virus. That will take decades, if ever, to recover. I don't need to tell a room of population health experts that. So the challenge here, of course, is public inquiry, tabloid newspapers, everywhere you go, the oversimplification of the problem. So when you lift the rock, you discover this challenge is much more multifaceted than you thought. And my limited job was to try and explain that to the population, stakeholders and parliamentarians as we went through this whole process. So that leads me to number two. What should you do? Well, you could just run away and be crippled by the challenge and never leave the house, which might be your response, because it does feel at times completely overwhelming. Or you could step up. You could choose, and it's a choice. You don't have to lead. You don't have to do the bit you want to do, but that's what you could do. And I would suggest that if you've decided to do this piece of the puzzle as a profession, whether you're in it already or you're studying to be in it, then perhaps you've already made that choice at some form, whether you want to be a leader in global health or a leader in health protection or a leader somewhere else. But it will feel like this. For those of you not familiar, this is Homer Simpson. Yes, familiar with Homer? So when I walk into the room with the First Minister at 8 o'clock in the morning and she's already read all the briefing, that's honestly how it feels. You think, what the heck is this? I got nothing to offer you. Everybody in that room, including her, has imposter syndrome. Every single person. And if you're in that room without imposter syndrome, you're probably in the wrong room. Because everybody feels exactly the same. That's how it's meant to feel. In order for you to bring yourself, your inadequacy, and your skill set and expertise into those conversations to try and find the best solution you can find. I've described it sometimes like on the telly. I've described it like a game show. Look, so people, if you read some narrative, it's as if there were two doors, and this door was marked good path, and this door was marked bad path, and we chose bad path. That's if only. There was about 4,000 doors, and they all said bad, and you didn't know what was behind each one. So I'm not being defensive. I'm just trying to describe the complexity of the decision making that was then involved. So you bring the analysis, you bring the public health expertise, which isn't me. I'm a public health expert if you're lucky, but fortunately there's lots of others, and then the economists and everybody else into that equation, and you try and find the best door to open, and that's literally how it worked. So when you're in this position and you're trying to lead, what should you do? So I ended up in this weird environment where this role kind of landed. She looked at me one day and said, and we've known each other a long time because she was the health secretary when I was doing patient safety and quality, and so we got a decent relationship. And she said, "What the heck am I going to do with you?" And I said, "Do you know what you're going to do with me? You just can't face it." And she said, "I know, I'm going to have to put you on the telly." Because we had lost Catherine at this point, remember, and Catherine was liked media and was good at media, but quite serious. And forgive me for saying so, Edinburgh, not Glasgow. Do you know what I mean? She's actually Irish, but do you know what I mean? So we needed somebody who could do Off the Ball. Some of you won't even know what Off the Ball is. Off the Ball is the most listened to radio show in Scotland. It's 500,000 people, broad demographic, and there was no football for them to talk about, so they needed something else. So I did it every week for 18 months. And we did phone-ins with the punters from all over the country. And it was to try and get the message in a way that people can understand. So, and she knew we needed to do that, and we needed people who would be able to manage that. But little did I know I would then end up in adverts on the telly. And I got off the train one night at Queen Street. This is peak COVID for me. It was 10:30 on a Sunday night. I was the only person on the train. The trains were basically running just for me because you were all in the house. And I was sitting on my wee carriage with my mask on. I'm not sure why I had a mask on. I was the only person on the bloody carriage. But the drivers were waving. I mean, the drivers were saying goodnight. I mean, it was literally, all right, Jace, good day, because we were the only two in the station. And Queen Street was getting done up. Remember, Queen Street was getting all done up. And they put video advertising screens everywhere. It was 10:30 on a Sunday night, and I looked up and I was on every screen. And I thought, this is a dystopian future. I do not want. And I also knew it was costing us 10 grand. And I was the only person watching it. And I knew already the message. So there wasn't. It really was peak COVID. Off the Ball is an interesting case study for public health communicators for years, I think. And for those of you who don't know it, he's a stand-up comedian, and he was the controller of Channel 4, and both are huge Scottish football fans. But Stuart is a genius. Stuart wrote the 3 definitive books on black soul music in the 50s and 60s. He's just written a new book on black singers in the White House, and he's a real polymath, proper polymath. And Tam's just a stand-up comedian punter from Motherwell, but also very, very clever and very sharp. And I thought I was going to lose my job every week. Every week. Nicola Sturgeon doesn't listen to Off the Ball, as a rule, but she listened to it when I was on it because she knew I was going to get us in trouble. And I would sometimes look at my phone and it would say, careful. Because he's keen on a double entendre, Tam, and it's 12 o'clock on a Saturday. So double entendre, you can't do it. And the National Clinical Director certainly can't do it. So you could hear this kind of, what's that grass in the West, in the Wild West that floats across the tumbleweed. You could hear that tumbleweed going sometimes when I wouldn't answer. But it got probably more listeners, and we were able to talk about vaccination in a way that was, and we were able to talk to sports fans. It really helped us with the ability to communicate. And then we did our best as much as we could to do advertising in a way that people could understand. We had real marketing experts. So these are this is a framework I've used for years. It comes from the organization I worked with in the States called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And so I've kind of retrofitted it to some of these lessons. I'm going to do this really quickly. If you want to learn more, IHI has what they call a white paper, all of their key learning. IHI is the global leader in healthcare systems change and improvement, and still at the front of that, even post-COVID. And Scotland still has a very good partnership with them. In fact, they've stolen some of our best people. The 5 leadership behaviours are really for high-performing health systems. It was a guy from Mayo Clinic who went around the world, and his exam question was, how do the leaders behave? Not what does the structure look like? What does the organogram look like? That question needs answer too. His exam question was, how do the leaders behave in high-performing systems individually? So that's why I like it, because it's something you can do, something you can change. And these are the 5 behaviors that he codified into the kind of, this is how the leaders he saw in Jönköping in Sweden, in Cincinnati Children's, in Salt Lake City, in Singapore, there's a kind of top 10 that we all know in our world of the best quality health systems in the world, including Alaska, which is probably the best health system in the world. And he saw person-centeredness. So in my world, person-centeredness in this new world became a whole set of different customers. So quite a lot of what I did was not visible to you. It was stakeholders. It was faith and belief leaders. It was Young Scott. It was the Scottish Football Association. I spoke to all managers and captains of all the football clubs. I didn't enjoy it entirely, but I did it. And to try and get them to stop sitting too close together on the buses, or faith leaders. So who knew that the Jewish community cared deeply about masks because they hated them because of chanting in their services? The Islamic community, entirely happy with the masks, hated the physical distancing because they do shoulder-to-shoulder worship. So if you don't allow them to have shoulder-to-shoulder worship, their worship is meaningless. So suddenly you're in an environment where you think, oh, this just got a bit more complicated. So when we're putting the guidance out for faith and belief, what we're going to do, because so better to be in the room talking to them hearing from them, giving them the best advice you can at the time, and trying to find the best way through. Young Scot were fascinating. Young Scot, we needed to speak to Scotland's young people. So they phoned me and said, will you come and speak to the young people of Scotland? I said, of course I will, whatever you want. Put on any you like. I'll talk to as many as you like. And they said, no, you've misunderstood. We want you to speak to our young people's healthcare advisory panel. They will speak to the young people. I said, oh, okay. So I had to teach 16 diverse young people from around the country. They then did the education of young people. It makes much more sense than the middle-aged white guy speaking to the young people. And it worked really well. Young Scot had one of the best websites in the world for COVID advice. It really engaged with young people all over the country across massively diverse demographics. And all I did was teach the front line what then to try and do. And we got massive vaccination rates that we weren't expecting. And that was down to conversations with Young Scot. So who's your customer is the lesson. So think about the people in the centre. The second is go to where the front line is. So this is now the First Minister. This is him as Health Secretary. Halfway through COVID, he gets the job as Health Secretary. You go, how would you like to be Health Secretary in the middle of a global pandemic? The last one just left. It's your job now. Flipping heck. And then not knowing 2 years later, he'd be the First Minister of the country. He's had a series of deals here that haven't always been fun for him. But this is our first visit to a hospital with him. And I tried, my front line changed during this period. It changed from hospitals and community practices and dentists. And I spend a lot of my time. So this week I'm in the blood transfusion service. Next week I'm at the ambulance service. So I try and spend a lot, 2 days a week, if I can, out in the health system to try and understand and learn what's happening. So my advice inside is then allegedly more informed. But my front line here became very different. My front line was the bus companies, the trains, the people who were keeping the electricity up. And I spent as much time as I could inside the business community, inside, and it meant I could try and learn. I spent a lot of time with people who run our buses because they were hugely important and quite difficult to make safe during the early days of the pandemic. And you can imagine the front line changes. So my second piece of advice is engage with your front line. It's probably not the bus companies, but whoever it might be. The third, I'm afraid, is the hardest. The third behaviour that Steve saw when he went round health systems was be relentless. So you've got to have energy and you've got to keep going. You've got to get up every day and keep doing it. Because change is hard and there will be people who push against you and you've got to keep trying. And that's the toughest one, which is why you need pals around you, why you need a group. And we had a group of people who were all on the same mission for COVID. And he saw relentless focus. My image here is about vaccination because you'll remember that we just bombarded the country with comms and marketing for vaccination. I expected 60%. That's what we get for flu. We got 95%. The public response to COVID vaccination was off the charts, way beyond what anybody thought was possible. Care homes and the elderly were astonishingly high, really, really high. You need to wane just a little bit, not so much in the elderly, actually. And interestingly, if you ask people if they've been touched by the disease, funnily enough, their vaccination rates are almost 100%. I mean, touched in a miserable way by a death or a loss or a long COVID. They get vaccinated. Those who still think the disease is abstract and distant from them, vaccination rate's not quite so high. It makes perfect human sense, doesn't it? The fourth is transparency. When Steve went round the health systems, they all told the truth. And they told it consciously and often. And that's what we tried to do. Now, this is argued now with hindsight bias, that we somehow had secret data and we had this conspiracy theory and let me tell you, the government can't get computers to all its staff. The thought of it running a conspiracy theory is fiction. It can barely run a day, never mind a conspiracy. We don't have the skill set to run a conspiracy, I swear. Unless there's a room somewhere that I don't know exists, and I honestly don't think there is. So transparency and trying to tell the truth. This is us talking to Scotland's young people on a Q&A day when we were trying to just tell the truth. And that's why we did press conferences probably beyond their natural life. When my mum sent me a text one day to say, son, the tennis is back, even I'm not watching. Thought maybe it's time to give these up because Sturgeon and I were using them for therapy rather than for actually informing anybody of anything. And but we did try and give the numbers every day. I've just answered some questions in that public inquiry thing last night, about what data did you give to the public and what, and when you look back, I mean, we gave them everything. We didn't have stuff there wasn't stuff we didn't give. Now, the interpretation of that data is then what leads you open to controversy. And then the fifth behaviour he saw was boundarylessness. It was the ability to work across natural silos. And I don't need to tell a university how tricky this is. I've been in this world a little bit. And apart from the health service, I think your universities are probably the most siloed organisations I've ever had the privilege of working inside. But everybody does it. It's human. And in COVID, we had to all work together, and it was new. I met the head of the Tourism Alliance, the head of the businesses, the head of the third sector organisation. So to try we were galvanised a bit because we all had one mission, which I think was helpful. Now, it feels harder to reproduce that sometimes because you're trying to focus on multiple fronts to try and do the same things, often in contrast to each other. So those are the 5 behaviours that Steve found when he looked at high-performing health systems, and I think they apply certainly to my version of leadership inside COVID, but they might have some application to you. So here's my final list, and then we'll tell a wee story at the end, and how are we doing for time? My watch is trying to tell me things, anything but the time. Oh no, we're good. It's still true. It's getting a little better, but it's still true. The workforces are exhausted. And I don't just mean health and social care. I mean education. I mean the electricity service, the people who work in ASDA. The people are tired. They're tired because this disease affected them personally, or their families. And they're also tired because of what they did during COVID. So I've got a great pal who works at customer service in ASDA. If you don't think the customer service desk at Bathgate ASDA was the front line of the COVID response, you've never done an hour at the front line of ASDA in Bathgate. It was hard work. Hard work. People were chucking things at them and throwing. It's really horrible. And the people who were out in the streets trying to keep your internet up and your electricity up. And of course, intensive care, GP practice, dental practices, everywhere else that you know exists. So the population is tired, and we have to give them time to breathe and recover. And yet all we're doing all the time is trying to make them go faster. When we built the Louisa Jordan at the SEC, people started to give us free stuff. Right? So we had more lint bunnies than anybody should ever have. Now, I'm all for a lint bunny. It's absolutely fine. And we got a lint bunny and moisturiser from John Lewis, and a fella came with a free cappuccino cart. I mean, it's fine. I'll take your cappuccino, no worries. This is not well-being. At the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, 4 miles up the road, there were no lint bunnies. And they were working just as hard as the Louisa Jordan people. So my point is not, take the free stuff, fine. But well-being is about time with your kids, getting enough holidays, making sure when your shift finishes you can leave, making sure you feel as though you're part of an overall team. That's well-being. And that's what we have to work hard at doing. Deming is the father of quality improvement, one of the fathers of my world of quality and healthcare and improvement. And he said, if you don't know how to ask the right question, you discover nothing. So I think we've got well-being maybe a little bit twisted. So let me finish with just a little preview. And we've talked about it a little bit, but I'm afraid this guy is my future. So he is Lord Brailsford. He's the new chair of the Scottish Public Inquiry, which had its first public hearing this week, and the first announcements of how he's going to work. The UK Public Inquiry is off and running. They're on module 2 of 6. They have dates in the diary for 2026. So it's my and Sturgeon's and Smith's future, I'm afraid, for some time to come. I'm very, very comfortable with it if it is about learning and if it is about trying to make it better, but also learning from the good things. I was slightly disappointed this week to hear the narrative of this inquiry earlier in the week saying our job is to find out what went wrong. I'm not sure that is your job. I think your job is, of course, partly to find out if anything went wrong and how to make it better. But your job is also to celebrate what went well and to encourage those who worked hard in care homes, in intensive care units, everywhere, in order, even in government. Even some of the civil servants perhaps deserve some credit for keeping the road on the show, keeping the show on the road. And of course, there's multiple versions of this. The UK inquiry, all other countries held out and didn't have individual country inquiries, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your view. Scotland has its own, so we have two to do. And I'm hoping that my 1,000 questions will be able to be given to the Scotland inquiry rather than them asking me another 1,000, but I think they might ask me another 1,000. It says this in their terms of reference. So I think that's a good question. I think that's a fair question, and we should be able to answer that in some form that will allow us to do it. You can, if you wish, tell the COVID inquiry how it was for you. It's not quite TripAdvisor, but they're trying to garner stories. Now, I would like them to hear warts and all, but I'd like them to hear from workers, from people who did it, as well as the care home relatives who have a very, very serious challenge to it about visiting in care homes. I think that's a legitimate question. In fact, you might have seen Alison Leitch on the telly this week being interviewed extensively. She's my cousin. I mean, I know them really well, and I've listened to them a lot, and I think they have legitimate concerns about how that piece of the puzzle was handled. I've also got a defence of it at the time, and also learning from it now. So let me finish with something I hope is a little more encouraging than some of the things we've talked about. So that same visit with Hamza, when we're on that hospital visit, right? So it's quite early on, and we're going around Monklands Hospital, and he does his first hospital visit, and he leaves, and I am then being taken to speak to all of the staff in the canteen. So there's a big gathering of staff, and I'm the kind of, thank you so much, morale boosting, you're great, keep going, we're not through it yet, right? And I'm taken by a healthcare assistant, a young lady in her early 20s, whose job is to escort me around my appointments in Monklands Hospital. And she's in infectious diseases. That's her job. She's a healthcare assistant in infectious diseases. And she's done 3 years pre-COVID and a year, 9 months of COVID. And I just visited infectious disease with the now First Minister. And we had heard that they'd had 19 deaths a week. 19 deaths a week in the first wave. So I started to talk to her about it, and she said, well, I hadn't seen any death for 3 years. I'd been in the ward, I hadn't seen anybody die, because people don't die of infectious disease. We fix them. That's how it works. But then she saw 19 deaths a week. She told stories of holding people's hands as they died, iPads of relatives watching. I mean, horror, just horror. And she was crying, walking as we were walking to the canteen, and she was really upset. And I said, so I'm so sorry. What's the plan? Are you done? Are you leaving? Are you going to go to Lidl's and make £15 an hour instead of £11 an hour here? And she said, no. And her wee face lit up. And she said, no, I'm going to be a nurse. I've applied. I've got in. The Open University are going to train me to be a nurse. So even in the horror, she had seen a profession, a caring profession that she wanted to be a part of. And it gave me hope. I do need to check that she's still in it. I should go back. I hope and think she probably is. The Open University does a hybrid, some of you will know it, does a hybrid course where you can keep your job, you still get paid, and then we train you to be a nurse kind of on the job. It's a fantastic mechanism for young ladies like her and young men to come through from healthcare assistants to nursing. So it was an encouraging story inside a terrible, terrible visit for having seen the misery. But even in there was some joy. My final piece of advice, though, is if you're ever in the DeLorean and dock, some of you might not know the 1980s science fiction movies. If you've never seen this movie, you should leave immediately. Stop everything you're doing and go watch one of the finest movies of all time. But if he tells you to choose a year, don't choose 2020 because it was grim. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. That was great. I'll give you a wee minute to have a drink. We've no questions in the chat yet. Does anyone in the audience? Ben? Peter?
Hi, thanks, Jason. Really good talk. Thanks for taking my question. So I worked the COVID pandemic in Central Africa and Malawi, the duration, and it felt like a very different experience from what you had here. And I'm wondering if, understandably focused on Scotland, but was there a discussion about the rest of the world, about vaccine access, and are these lockdowns appropriate for the rest of the world? things like that. It's interesting what happened.
It's a great question, and I think it's ongoing and needs people like you need to help us with it. The convening of it is a bit tricky. So the convening of it is the WHO in the main. So the WHO tries to do that, and that's why some of the questions about did you follow WHO guidance are of course partly because WHO is trying to do that for 197 member countries. So the advice to Central African Republic is different from the advice for developed healthcare systems with cash, with access to vaccines, with access to PPE. So I don't think we've fully learned. I think there are lessons in both directions. Senegal had one of the best COVID responses in the world, and we, so-called developed world, should learn from Senegal. South Korea had an interesting journey. South Korea had blips late on, but was very managed early. But they were very, very controlled. I mean, you literally couldn't go out with pieces of paper and signing in, which is why Mickey Mouse went to the nightclub a lot, because there was a lot of Mickey Mouses signed into particularly the LGBT nightclubs in South Korea. So I think there are lessons. Convening it is tricky. I think one of the things academic institutions could help us with is exactly that, is that bridging of global health and Scotland. We've got some of it. We've got a relationship with Malawi. I know them relatively well. I know their head of quality. I know the minister. And we've got a relationship with Zambia. We've got a tripartite thing. It's fine. Does it lead to true understanding and learning? I'm not sure it does. During COVID, we had mechanisms for trying to do that with countries that we already had relationships with. So we were able to learn from Canada and the US. I helped run a hospital in Israel. Weird story. There's a Scottish hospital in Nazareth. So I knew what they were doing, and Israel were often ahead of what we were doing. So that was a helpful relationship. So that was a bit serendipitous rather than designed.
We're just about to start the rollout of the autumn-winter booster program.
Yeah.
And we're hearing of new variants appearing on the scene. What evidence do we have that the extant vaccines are going to be effective against the new variants?
Yeah, so can you hear at the back? What evidence have we got of the rollout of the autumn-winter vaccine is going to help against the new variant? So we need to divide the world into existing new variants and scary new variants. So existing new variants, so the present circulating COVID, we know this vaccine is good, and we know it's as good as it was in the spring. And we're about to get XBB, which is new vaccine, so better vaccine for present variants. So the rise you see just now, although it has flattened, if any of you saw me on the news last week, I wasn't trying to scare everybody, I was trying to calm everybody down because the Daily Record had gone a bit stupid. And we were trying to calm everybody down. So the rise, 205 people in hospital last week with COVID as part of their diagnosis on admission is up, but we seem to have stabilized this week. We're expecting up and down for the rest of summer into autumn, but then we're expecting a rise. So vaccine for that, good, which is why you should get it. But Denmark, South Africa, UK, somewhere else in the Far East, can't remember, our best genomic sequencing places have got 9 versions of a new one, which does look a wee bit scary. But we don't know enough for it to be actually scary. In a room of intelligent people, you can understand that's different from it being actually scary. It just looks to the boffins as though it's got an awful lot of variation in it compared to the one we're dealing with just now. Nobody knows if it'll win the race, if it'll become dominant, and nobody knows if it's vaccine escape or not. The reality is it would have to jump quite a long way for us to end up anywhere near population restrictions. I can't envisage population restrictions unless we had real all-cause mortality across the population. I mean, would you go back in the house if I told you? No, you wouldn't. Tell the truth. And you're mostly intelligent. So we're scunner. We're scunner too. But if you've got dead people in the corridors outside intensive care, then we have to go back to our houses. I mean, that's not completely impossible, but there is nothing in the viral genomics that suggests we're heading that way. It appears to have slowed down from its first 2 years of development, and it's now staying as Omicron. I always say that if the WHO give it a new Greek letter, I might have to go back on the telly. So the Greek letters mean it's changed enough for it to have, but remember, the next one might be better, because we don't care about spread, we care about severity. We care only that it kills and maims you. We don't actually care if you catch it. Does that make sense? I mean, we care if you catch it, of course we do. But actually a mild virus giving us immunity would be much better than a severe virus killing 10%.
From the Centre for Research.
Oh, do you want to answer this question?
No, first of all, I also work in Monklands Hospital, so I'll find out for you.
Please do if she's not a nurse anymore, I don't want to know.
Backing up. Or she's changed to the dark side. My question is with regarding, the Scottish Government announced that there's a cutback in testing, including symptomatic healthcare workers who are advised not to test, but to stay at home until. How do you balance the messaging with kind of anxiety about increasing virus rates in hospitals and balancing ward closures with the harms of increasing virus circulation in hospitals?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think it's a really tricky question. And what I always direct tricky questions to the boffins who advise us. So there's a group that decides when to turn testing on or off. There's no country in the world doing mass testing anymore, not one. And pretty much everybody has stopped symptomatic testing of everybody. We're still doing it in transplant units. We're still doing it in really high end, and people are still doing it in high end areas around the world. The balance that the healthcare associated infection and the virology and the people are making is that there has to be flu testing exists. Flu testing is available. When was the last time any of you had a flu test? Never in your whole lives. So what we're doing is we're basically saying it's not the same as flu. The disease is different. But what we're saying now is we have a clinical test for a disease. We have that for flu, we have that for COVID, we have it for RSV. We're now going to leave it up to individual clinical decision making when to do that test. So if you arrive in an ED and you're 85 years old, you're off your legs, you're coughing your guts up, you're almost certainly going to get a flu test in October. Now you'll also get a COVID test in October, and we will adjust your treatment according to whatever what those tests show. We'll give you certain antivirals, we'll isolate you, we'll admit you, will not admit you. So that bit's done. Then you have to decide what to do with your general population. We've been that. We've said no mass population testing because it's not helping us anymore. There's then the middle group, which is the tricky question, which is your bit of what do you do for key workers who are required for X, Y, Z. We want you, if you've got an infectious disease, not to be at work. Now, we've always wanted that, and you've always been rubbish at it. Me too, because we think it's big and strong to be at work. And that's hard in intensive care or ED or wherever you happen to be, but that's what we're trying to force. We're trying to force people to stay at home if they're poorly. The only thing I would correct is the increased number of outbreaks and the increased number is actually slowing now. Now, I might be wrong and next week might go up again, but the numbers from this week look better than last week. So it may be a false dawn, but
there's talk of making the next booster available for purchase for those groups who aren't in there. That strikes me as a good way of increasing or magnifying health inequalities within COVID. And the full
but that sentence could have gone anywhere. I was wondering where it I'm kind of glad it went where it went.
a full reward for for a population who said had 95% uptake in the first vaccine. So I was wondering what the latest thinking on that was.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you in my heart from a social value perspective. There's nothing we can do to stop companies selling. If they have enough available. Now frankly right now we're buying it all, so they've got no availability, and they've promised the contracts are long enough that they've promised us pretty much everything they've got. Now that takes us to a different problem, which my friend in the front here would immediately reference, which is are you taking all the vaccine for the North and the Global South? It's not getting. Actually, the problem in the Global South is presently not vaccine, it's last mile delivery of vaccine is the problem as far as we can tell. Different question. I think companies will begin to do it. Moderna and Pfizer have both said in the US they're going to charge about $150 for a dose. and they're going to do it in the US first. Now, the US is the obvious place to do it because they've got that open market. I think it'll eventually come here a bit like flu. You'll be able to go and get it. The Joint Committee on Vaccination will, that's BOFINs. Remember, I take BOFINs do the difficult questions. So the BOFINs are looking at this increase. They're also looking at the new variants. They're looking at, so they may adjust I wouldn't be at all surprised if they adjust the pace, adjust the sequencing, even adjust the ages, depending on what happens with this new version of the virus. If it dies out, I think we'll stay where we are. If it comes bigger, we might roll out faster. We've got enough vaccine to do that. So in my social value perspective, I agree with you, but I think probably in a market and a free and open market, it's coming. It's coming.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. Sorry, I want to give them an opportunity.
Of course.
I'll ask the first one. So the first one's quite long. I'd like to ask about the person responsible for advising the First Minister on the economic impact of COVID response, particularly lockdowns. Who, if anyone, was translating to the First Minister his messages about the economic impact of lockdowns into what these economic consequences meant for the health of the population at the moment and in the future? For example, it says here shorter life expectancy through increased public debt, inflation, etc.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So that's basically the premise is all four harms are public health harms, which is true. But the COVID is a public health harm, but so is economics. Economics is not just about losing your house; it's about the health consequences of losing your house or your business. So those are translated. Public Health Scotland is in those rooms. The public health expertise is in the room. Linda, Carol, the economist is there to show us the figures and the numbers, but there are translators within the advisory structures from the Scottish COVID Advisory Group, from SAGE, from others who try and do that translation. The difficulty, and the answer back to the questioner, is that analysis is not as strong as it is for harms 1 and 2. Now, some of that's inevitable because it's medium to long term and you can't do it. Some of it is because we're not very good at it. And we need to get better at what that means. So if unemployment does this, what does that mean for the health of the population? So you can give some answer to that, but we're not as good at answering that as we could be, which is why institutions like this are so crucial to be able to give us those kinds of answers. I can reassure the questioner that those questions, those broad questions, were always asked. But let's remember, you've got instant death. Really, you've got an acute virus, it's killed all these people in Italy, that the population are scared of, that you see people dying in care homes now. And putting up against that, you're putting up against that an idea that economic harm, which you will generate, will cause medium to long-term harm to your population. That's quite a hard equation. So what's the plan? Just let the people die? Because we need Giuseppe to stay open. I'm using Giuseppe as a kind of example, not just Giuseppe. So that's a beyond brave politician that would make that choice. That's herd immunity by infection, not herd immunity by time and vaccination. That was never the plan. Despite what Channel 4 suggested, I said. There was somebody over here with that.
I had one. Hi, thanks. I'm Lindsay Pope. I'm a GP in Inverclyde and I work in a general practice team here.
You're back here. What are you doing here? For heaven's sake.
I was also fortunate enough to be a member of the Scottish Doctors' Wellbeing Study. So it was really nice to hear you highlight the importance of staff wellbeing. And one of the things that we realise is that's probably more important now than it ever has been, as you highlighted. So going forward, I'm starting to see the impact of workforce wellbeing on workforce retention and therefore secondary impacts onto our patients. So how do you envisage we improve that situation going forward, taking a national and evidence-informed approach?
So the question is about how do you do wellbeing, particularly in this context for doctors and clinical teams in general practice? I honestly don't know. It's so multifactorial that I think we need expert help. The Workforce Directorate in government, led by Gillian Russell, is terrific. It's doing really deep work. Some of you and your colleagues are engaged in there. It feels to me like a real wicked problem because it needs local change inside practice, inside ICU, inside general practice, inside dental practices, where it's about relatively stupid things like eating together and making sure people get breaks and making sure people get annual leave when you said they would get it, and family-centred employment and all of that at a local level, some of which we don't have the levers for because it's managed by a contractor. And then you've got to create that culture and environment more nationally. I think I'd see some of that. NES have got really good work. I see some of it, but it feels hard, particularly when we're then saying run faster, there's too many people waiting, you're not seeing enough patients, you're a clown, all that garbage, which isn't true, of course, to try and get it. So I think we need you to keep fighting that good fight. And it has to come from the bottom up, and then we have to fund it appropriately, we have to value it appropriately, and we also have to create enough people in the workforce in order for it to be able to be doable. Because if you're a GP now in some parts of Scotland, you're struggling to find anybody to cover for you if you want to have a weekend off, never mind a holiday. But I agree the importance of it, and it is talked about a lot in government.
A few minutes past, do you mind?
No, I can go to. I've got another talk at 3 at my house, which is a 10-minute cycle. So I can go to 15:15.
There's one more online I would like to ask. So what is the burden of long COVID on health, disability and the economy? How can this be measured if testing is not readily available?
Yeah, we don't know is the answer to the first question, but the problem is not testing. The problem is we don't know what it is and we don't know what it does. So we know roughly what post-viral syndromes are, but healthcare's not particularly good at diagnosing them or working out what you need to do for them. We know long COVID exists. We know it's a big syndrome of neurological, gastrointestinal, respiratory, neurological. It's a massive set of symptoms, massively varied. Most people get better at 12 months. There's a tail that don't seem to get better, and we don't know why. Some are in one group and some are in the other. And there's massive amounts of research all over the world to try and work that out. The burden is significant. The estimates vary from 1 in 100 to 1 in 12. Again, we haven't had the disease long enough to be absolutely sure. We've got quite a lot of work ongoing about what people should do, where they should go, a lot of advice online. But those of you who have worked in, particularly in general practice, this is the undiagnosed walking into a room and telling you there are 20 symptoms. I mean, that's literally what this is. And it's so hard to try and strip away. I'm looking at you because I figure that's part of your life. To try and strip away, where are we going to go now? Are we going to go to neurology here? Are we going to go time off work? What you need is rest. Are we going to go, actually, you've got lung scarring. So we're going to have a respiratory conversation with you that says some of that is done. Some of that's forever. Or you've got GI symptoms and we think we might have a solution for some of it. So it's such a hard, multi-organ challenge for us. One of the reasons for vaccination, one of the reasons for keeping the infection rates as low as we can, is to limit that burden going forward.
And what this person is asking, which is similar to the position people were in who had COVID early on and weren't tested and now have long COVID. How do you know these symptoms have arisen following COVID if nobody is tested?
Yeah, you don't know for you don't know for certain. And remember, some things happen randomly. So you can have disease post-vaccination that you were going to get whether you had the vaccination or not. So vaccination didn't cause you to crash your car. You were going to crash your car. You have to have your vaccine before you crashed your car. These two things are not related, usually. So some people are tested for COVID. So if you have severe COVID, clinically severe COVID, you will probably be tested because you'll be in hospital. But others will have a set of symptoms that will be diagnosed in primary care, like they are just now for glandular fever, like they are just now for post-flu syndrome, and that's what our system does. The alternative is mass vaccination of the population for a single disease and not other diseases. That's not how we choose to deal with massive infectious diseases in this country, and that's why the experts are telling us not to do it for this. Last one.
Okay, so coming back to your economist question online. So you talked about the decision-making sort of rules that you use. We would maybe refer to those as a bit rule of rescue, saving current generations now from those lives lost. What do you think generations in the future will think back and say about those decision rules? Well,
it's already happening, that hindsight bias. it's already happening somewhat in the environment of the inquiry or even in the media. Even when I was on the telly this week, the abuse on Twitter was off the scale worse than it had been, and it's been bad. It was off the scale worse from just a few weeks ago because people have short memories. When teaching that, what did you call it?
Rule of rescue.
When teaching rule of rescue, I'd like you to have the First Minister in the front of the room or simulate that because what you're actually asking here, theory, I like it. The theory's good. What you're actually asking here is Emmanuel Macron or Olaf Scholz to say, okay, I hear you. I kind of believe you, but you don't know what COVID's going to do in the long term. You've no idea long COVID exists. Vaccine's not coming. That's what the science today is. Vaccines not coming to save us. Italy is in complete disarray. They're rioting on the streets because folk are dead and there's not enough intensive care unit beds. What's your plan? Well, the rule of rescue says we should let these people die because we're going to save 100,000 lives going forward. No chance. That's never. Now, I'm exaggerating for effect, but it's an interesting dilemma. But you've got to, when you're having those conversations, you've got to think the decision makers in the room, because abstract public health theory, I'm not suggesting it's abstract public health theory, but public health theory that you cannot apply in real world, Central African Republic real world, or Scotland real world, you're not going to be in the room for long because she's not going to she's not going to tolerate it. So one of the challenges in public health policy is pragmatism. And the reality of which fights to fight and which ones you can't possibly win. And there's an awful, I've written a lot of answers in my public inquiry response that start at the time. Because at the time, with the knowledge you have on the 4th of March, your answer might be very different from the 4th of March 3 years later. And that's what I hope the inquiry will recognise. I have doubts. The First Minister would love to come and have that conversation with me. The former First Minister would love. Jean Freeman would love that conversation.
I like your approach about pragmatism. So I do think that's where a lot of the economists are moving into in that public health space, which we.
It doesn't mean it doesn't mean that the decision makers don't want to hear that if you do this, this will happen. Of course.
I think we'll let you go.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was a really good turnout. I'm thrilled. Thank you.
Thanks for giving up your time.
Thank you.
Not at all. It was fun.